Welcome to the Clemson Insiders on the Beat segment. I'm Will Vandervoort. This is Matt Conley from the State newspaper. Matt, thanks for joining us again this week.
Sure, glad to be here.
Yeah, we're trying to get you ready for the Clemson at NC State game this week at Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh, North Carolina. 7:30 kickoff on ABC, national game. Kirk Herbstreit and those guys there. You think this because Kirk Herbstreit just wants to see his boys play?
I don't know what this is, but yeah, this will be probably the least competitive ABC primetime game of the year, if I had to guess.
It's one of them. I've seen a couple of Ohio State games that weren't. Michigan State game wasn't very good.
Not a lot better. But.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, and I joke around, but I'm interested to see if the Herbstreit boys are on the traveling roster this week.
That will be interesting to see. I mean, if you're going to take them on a road game, this might be the one to do it.
Yeah,
I can't imagine you're going to need all 72
exactly
this weekend.
And I imagine, Dabo knows Kirk's coming, so why not make old dad happy and let him see his sons,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
If anybody thinks about how to help his sons and get some, thinks about his boys, it's Dabo Swinney, because he finds a way to get his boys on the field, and that's cool when the game doesn't matter, you
Drew
get them
had a catch, I think, this past week or the week before, so.
Yeah, and those kids work.
Those guys involved, right?
What everybody doesn't realize, those guys work their butts off during the week in practice. It's good, and Dabo talked about that on Tuesday. He talked about, why it's important to get those guys on the field because it gives them a sense of, hey, they're working hard and they're getting rewarded for working hard, and that's pretty cool that he does those things.
Yeah, I know Will, lots of times we see him as one of the last guys on the field, catching balls after practice and always working hard. So, yeah, good for those guys.
Well, what we're going to start with, the college football playoff rankings came out the other night, and everybody by now knows where Clemson's at and all. So my question is, we don't really talk about the rankings as much because that's already been, people have done that. So let's talk about more how Clemson stacks up against these teams. So when you look at Clemson with a possibility of playing Ohio State or Clemson with the possibility of playing Alabama or LSU, how do you think Clemson compares to those teams?
It's interesting. I think just as far as resume-wise, I think Ohio State probably just top to bottom has been the most complete team to this point. They've really dominated everyone and kind of done it on both sides of the ball. I think LSU maybe has the best offense, which kind of seems crazy to see. Other than Clemson, I mean, if Clemson's rolling, I'll put their offense up there with anyone. But I think right now, other than Clemson, LSU's offense has just been really, really impressive. Defensively, they've kind of been hit or miss. I know they gave up a ton of points to Vanderbilt and some other games where they haven't played great. Alabama, we'll see. I mean, I think it's kind of the same as LSU, and I'm really excited for that game this weekend, particularly if Tua plays. But I think it could be a shootout. I don't really trust either defense completely at this point. I think Alabama's going to keep getting better as the year goes along, but this isn't a typical Alabama defense you see. So I don't know that there's really a complete team, top to bottom in the country that you really feel good about the way you have in the past where it's been Clemson and Alabama. Obviously, Clemson has played great at times. We've seen what they're capable of, but they've also had some games where they haven't been great. Here lately they've been playing really well. But some of the things that they did earlier in the year, whether it be Trevor throwing a couple of picks in the first quarter at Louisville or the North Carolina game where they kind of let a team hang around, some of those mistakes that they've made and that they've had as the season goes along, and we haven't seen them as much lately, but if they do revert back to that, any team that they would see in the playoff can beat them. At the same time, if they start taking care of the football, they haven't turned it over the past 2 weeks, play well, play up to their capabilities, they can beat anyone. So I think it's fascinating this year. Really, really looking forward to the playoff. Yeah,
I think it is. I think when you look at these teams, I agree with you. Ohio State looks the part on both sides. I really do. I've watched them play. I still have some questions about Fields when he has to play because he did get sacked 3 times against Michigan State in the first quarter and looked like he struggled a little bit there before they got the running game going. And then also he struggled early against Wisconsin, with some sacks and taking. Sure. And when you play Clemson and the pressures Brent Venables brings, he's going to confuse you as a quarterback. And so my only question with Ohio State is Justin Fields when he plays an elite defense, which he hasn't done to this point. A lot of people say, well, what about Wisconsin? Wisconsin is not Alabama or Clemson kind of elite speed defense, or even LSU. I think LSU
Athletes
has
wise.
athletes all over
Right.
the place. So he hasn't seen that kind of speed yet from any of the Big Ten teams. And I want to see how he adjusts to that, because I think there was a reason why Kirby Smart didn't have him playing last year at Georgia. And I think we could find that out. Now, as I look at the other teams, I'm with you with Alabama. They're struggling. Defensively, there's no doubt. I think, the same can be said for LSU defensively overall, even though I think LSU is getting a little bit healthier and you're starting to see some improvement there. I've been one that's contested that I think the SEC is a little overrated this year. I think a lot of people are basing off the past, but I don't know if some of these SEC offenses are as good as LSU's and Alabama's and can match those two teams point for point. And I think, when you look at Auburn's wins with Florida and Auburn, I think that's part of the issues there that I have. I just not 100% sure there. And when I look at Clemson, I'm with you. Early in the year, struggled. You saw some hiccups on offense, and they just didn't look good. But that's also been Clemson's mantra since Dabo Swinney's been the head coach. They never look good offensively early in the season. That was the case with Taj Boyd. That was the case with Deshaun Watson, and that's been the case now with Trevor Lawrence. It was that way with Kelly Bryant, too, in 2017. Sure. They always hit their mojo on the back half of the season. I think we've seen that these last 4 weeks. I think Clemson's starting to put together where they look like a complete football team, because defensively they've been dominant all year long. And I think that's going to continue as we go forward. So I'm kind of with you. I don't have 100% certainty on every team, but I do think right now from the eye test, I think the two best teams to me are Ohio State and Clemson from an overall eye test standpoint. And then, we'll find out here. I'm with you. I think we'll learn a little bit more about Alabama and LSU this Saturday when they play down there in Tuscaloosa.
And the other thing, that I keep going back to is the last time we saw Clemson play Ohio State on the field, it wasn't a game. And Ohio State that year, they were talked about a lot. I don't think that team was as good as this one, but it was still a team that was in the college football playoff. They had a ton of athletes, a ton of really good players.
Top 5 offense, top 5 defense.
A lot of guys that are currently playing in the NFL. I remember Dabo talking that week about how he had read Urban Meyer's book and all, we're just lucky to be playing in this game and blah, blah, blah. Thankful to go compete against Urban Meyer. And then he whooped him up and down the field for 4 quarters, and it wasn't competitive. And the same thing with Alabama. The last time we saw Clemson play Alabama, it wasn't a competitive game. So,
and I think that Alabama team last year is better than this year's Alabama team.
Maybe. I think offensively they're pretty similar, but I think, that defense was probably a little better. I think this offense, if Tua can get healthy and they have a chance to be maybe right there with those receivers that they have. But it's a lot of the same guys as last year. Their running game's maybe not as good. So, at this point in the season, probably last year's Alabama team was better. It'll be interesting to see just, the fact that the last few times Clemson's played these other competitors, they've kind of had their way with them. And so we'll see if that continues.
Now, what we do know is Clemson controls its own destiny. If they went out because everybody else plays, it doesn't. Everybody's got to play everybody else, so they're all going to beat each other up. And Clemson's going to, I don't know how much they'll move up, but they'll move up a little, and they'll be in the top 4 when it's all said and done, as long as they win out, as long as Clemson keeps winning. I think that is definite. And so when I look at teams that could challenge, that are just sitting there, you look at Penn State. I think you look at Georgia as a one-loss team, Oregon as a one-loss team. And then, of course, depending on this weekend against Minnesota, Penn State game, Minnesota could sneak up there. Maybe they're a team that you start looking at and paying attention to. I don't know yet. I don't know if that program's there to that level yet, but I think Penn State's pretty close. I still question Penn State's offensive efficiency. I think Penn State, of all the teams we've just mentioned, is the worst offense of the group, and I don't know if they can keep up scoring-wise with it, because I think obviously Clemson can match up with Penn State's physicality, and I think Ohio State can. But I don't think, even though LSU and Alabama might struggle somewhat, I still think Alabama and LSU are pretty good and fast enough, talent-wise, speed in the back end, that they'll cause Penn State trouble that they haven't seen. So, who of those group of teams that I just mentioned do you think can probably sneak into maybe the Final Four when it's all said and done?
Oregon is a team that fascinates me just because you see what they've done, what they've gotten into Pac-12 play. And I know the Pac-12 isn't top-heavy, but they've got some good teams. I don't think it's like last year where they were just a really bad conference, but You look at Oregon, they went on the road. I know it was a neutral site game, but still, they weren't playing at home. They opened the year against Auburn, a good Auburn team. I know you think the SEC's overrated some, and that's certainly possible, but I still think it's a good Auburn team that they went toe-to-toe with and ended up losing late. And so do you punish them for going on the road and playing that game? It's hard to say. I think that's a team that I kind of would give the benefit of the doubt to. Just if they can keep winning, if they can go and win the Pac-12. You look what they did to Southern Cal this past weekend. I thought that would be a tough challenge. I thought, on the road that would be a game that would maybe give them some issues.
They made it look easy.
They just destroyed them, and so.
Did you pick them in our Pick'ems challenge? I did too. So I think me and you were one of the few that did. And but anyway, we did well the rest of the picks.
Yeah, we did okay, but yeah, I just think Oregon, if they go through the whole year and their only loss is a close game at Auburn on a neutral site game, what is that saying? Are you going to punish them for going out and playing a tough team, or are you going to say, hey, we commend you for going out and scheduling that game, and you took care of business the rest of the way. We're going to reward you with a playoff berth. So that's the team that really interests me right now. I think defensively too, everyone knows as Oregon is running up the field and scoring a bunch of points.
That's not who they are now.
But God, they've got a really good
they're good on offense and they score, but Oregon, like under Chip Kelly, was a finesse team on offense and defense, and that's what they were. They're not a finesse football team anymore. No. They're physical at the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and now they're starting to get that back end speed that you see at the Clemsons and Alabamas and LSUs and Ohio States of the world. Not to the level of those teams yet, but they're getting close, and you can see that kind of influence now is in their program. I think they're a really good football team. I think they were better than Auburn, and they just weren't the better team didn't win that day. Don't get me wrong, I think the SEC is overrated, but I still think Auburn's a good football team, and I think that's a good game to measure them by. So if they are in that, you're trying to figure out are they number 4 or what, I think you could look back at that game and say, well, for 3.5 quarters, they were the better team, and they dominated Auburn at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Sure. So they just turned it over and had some silly mistakes, and they didn't even have their best player in that game, remember? So I don't know. It's interesting. They're definitely a team, I'm with you, that I pay attention to and watch as the college football playoff stuff goes along.
And Penn State, like you mentioned, their offense, I know they've got some speed, but overall, top to bottom, I just don't really trust them. Georgia, it's the same thing.
Can't get that South Carolina game.
They've got all the talent in the world. But God, when you lose to South Carolina, you lay an egg in that game.
At home.
I think I don't trust their receivers. I think they still need to kind of develop some playmakers there. Their running game's obviously really good. Their defense, they've got a ton of talent on that side of the ball. But when you lose that game the way that they did, and playing South Carolina's playing a third-string quarterback, and you just can't lose that game. And so if they run the table, if they beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, they'd obviously also have to beat Auburn as well. Maybe they sneak in, but man, I just think right now if I was picking one of those, it'd probably be Oregon.
Yeah, and again, go with Georgia. What Georgia reminds me of is Alabama, 2015 Alabama. Where they have a game manager. It's obviously that Fromm is a game manager because when he has to win the game for him, he hasn't done it. South Carolina game's a great example of that. I think he's 0-5 when throwing 30 or more passes. So, he is Alabama 5 years ago, and that worked 5 years ago, but that doesn't work in today's college football anymore. And that's why Nick Saban went to a guy like Tua and has the spread concepts now and tossing the football all over the place and has those wide receivers that are, oh my goodness, right. That's why they went that way. And that's what worries me about Georgia is and I think the playoff committee is going to look at that. If Georgia gets in there, how would they compete against Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, or Alabama? How would they compete if they were to play them on a neutral site? And I think that's what may hurt Georgia when it all comes down. Because the committee does think about that. They do think about the playoff matchups, especially when they get that close. They do put some thought into the playoff matchups, like what will it look like? Because that's why Ohio State, I believe, 2 years ago didn't make the playoffs, even though they won the Big Ten. I think they looked at that loss they had to Iowa, and they thought about, okay, what would Ohio State do if they played Clemson in the first round of the playoffs, which is who Alabama played? Mm-hmm. Would they be able to compete? The committee probably thought they wouldn't, that Clemson would run them out of the building again, which I think they would have. And so that's why Alabama got the nod. And I think that's where Georgia's going to be sitting at this year. They're this year's Ohio State. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, and the only thing I'll say, though, is, if they're able to get it going and some of these younger guys on offense at receiver start stepping up and, they go and beat an Alabama, maybe things change as the year goes along. But right now, yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Now, there is a football game to talk about. Clemson has to win out, as we mentioned, or none of this matters. So, and of course, this week's game is, Dabo Swinney likes to say, we got to be 1-0 this week. They got to be 1-0. That's the thing. You hear that? Everybody's using that now. Yeah. I mean, every coach you listen to, whether it's at Oregon or Minnesota or Penn State.
Jalen Hurts this week.
Jalen Hurts this week. Talks about everybody uses Dabo Swinney's thing. Trust me, this is a Dabo Swinney thing because he's been saying 1-0 since 2011.
Right.
So it's interesting. But anyway, Clemson has to go 1-0 this week, and that starts with NC State. What are your thoughts on this game?
I think it's going to get ugly. Dabo mentioned today probably the best part of NC State's offense was their offensive line, and their offensive line is not good. So if that's the best part, that's not saying a whole lot of great things. I think he said they're a young team. They're dangerous because they're young, and you don't know what you're going to get. And yeah, I think we probably know what we're going to get. I mean, they've just been so bad this year. They were down 4 touchdowns or so to Wake Forest at halftime last week. I just think it's a complete mismatch. I know Dabo said it's a tough place to play, and it can be. And, when they've got some good teams and you go in there, it can be tough to play. But I don't think this is one of them. And I think Clemson fans will travel well, and there'll probably be a lot of orange there. And it's hard to see this being anything other than a blowout to me, particularly with the way Clemson's played the last few weeks. Yeah,
I think if this game was played in the middle of the season, this might be, even though I think Clemson would win the game, it might be a little bit more challenging because I think NC State would be healthier and they would be playing probably with a little bit more confidence than they are right now. And it would be on the road in an environment that I do believe outside of Clemson and Virginia Tech is the third best college football environment in the ACC, and it's not even close. Sorry, Florida State, that's a fact. I've been to Tallahassee, and it does not impress me as far as intimidation goes. Maybe that's because Florida State hadn't been good in a while.
Florida State, I know what.
Maybe Bobby Bowden, Florida State, when they're at their heyday, it was intimidating. But
the Dalvin Cook game a few years ago,
that was pretty good. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. Gosh, but not like Raleigh, where
so many times, these past 2 years at Florida State. I mean, there's nobody there, and I think Dabo brought that up this week too.
Yeah.
Even when NC State's struggling, they're still going to show up and pack the place.
Especially when they're playing Clemson.
Yeah.
Because they hate Clemson.
And that's not the case at Florida State. Those crowds this year have just been awful.
Yeah, I remember Florida State last year. I mean, when they were struggling and we went down there and there was nobody there. I mean, there was you could argue, I wouldn't say there was many Clemson fans, but there was it seemed like at times there was more Clemson fans than there was
Definitely
Florida State.
Louder with the way the game unfolded.
With the way the game unfolded, yes. But my point being is NC State fans do not like Clemson at all. That's been obvious over the years, and so I think that little bit of rivalry. I wrote a piece this week about, what do you consider a rivalry, and I have a different opinion than most people. Most people it's all about wins and losses, and I'm not really so much of that. To me, a rivalry is really dictated on the fan bases, in my opinion. And NC State dislikes Clemson's fan base, and Clemson dislikes NC State's fan base, and it's obvious when those two play. I get it on my end. I'm sure you do too. I write one story about NC State, and the NC State people come at me. So
that's happened for a few years for you.
It has, and that's okay. I don't mind it, but it's just it's funny that it tells me that they really care about Clemson, and so it makes it a little bit of rivalry. Now, is it Clemson-Carolina rivalry? No, it's not like that. But it can get intense in times, and even though Clemson's dominated the series. NC State fans, they get into it when Clemson comes up there, and we know they're just pretty much like Carolina fans. They're throwing water bottles and stuff like that at people, and so it's dangerous for the players on the sideline and all. But it lets you understand that there is a rivalry there, and we've seen since 2013 there's been a little bit of a rivalry between Dabo's coaching staff and NC State's coaching staff.
Yeah, I don't think Dabo and Dave Doran are probably
the best of friends.
Christmas card.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I mean when a couple years ago when the laptop thing happened and to accuse a team of cheating and kind of questioning their character, I don't think Dabo. It was pretty obvious he wasn't a big fan of that.
No.
So, I can't remember exactly what he said, but something about the investigation should be on their side or all kinds of stuff.
And then there was Towelgate.
The Towelgate that we had with Chubbs on the towels.
The guy, Kitchens, punched, or didn't punch, but pushed Deshaun Watson in the back there in 2015.
Isaiah Battle with a knockout punch
13.
At NC State. I mean, there's just been all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, definitely no love lost between these two teams.
No, and that makes it a little fun. So it'll be a little bit interesting on Saturday, but then the game will kick off, and I think there will be no more interest. So, sorry, NC State, but that's how I feel. Anyway, so that's all we got. Matt, appreciate you being here, buddy. Stay tuned to the Clemson Insider. We'll have more game coverage, all that stuff, previews and stuff as we get you ready for Clemson at NC State this Saturday night at Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh. We'll see you on the other side.